A pastor and a priest walk into a movie theater. Hi, I'm Father Andrew Miller.
And I'm Reverend Michelle Byerly.
And this is A Pastor and a Priest Walk Into a Movie Theater, a podcast about faith, life, and the silver screen. Today we'll be discussing the 1990 sports film Days of Thunder.
For those of you who have not seen it, we recommend that you do. It is starring Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman as some of the main characters, along with an incredible cast, actually. Really, Robert Duvall and many others. So, Andrew, you were the one who picked this movie for us. Can you tell me about that?
Well, for the record, I didn't pick the film for us, although I had wanted to do it. But this was an audience pick, kind of.
Oh.
We were hoping that one of my dear friends who I met in CPE of all places, although he had graduated by the time you had come along, decided not to do a fellowship. A fellow by the name of Dave Hickey suggested that I watch this film, and well, I'd heard of the film, and I'd seen Top Gun many times, and I was like, wait a minute, this is just Top Gun on a racetrack, and Top Gun is a fun piece of crap. I mean, this is just going to be a fun. No. Trust me, it's very theologically pregnant, and he was right. It really is. I would not go so far as to say that Days of Thunder is a good movie, but I would go so far as to say that it is, however accidentally, a theologically rich movie. And it's of course about NASCAR. It's about a young upstart NASCAR driver who kind of switches from running the equivalent of IndyCar or Formula One to come and just up and drive NASCAR, and the hilarity and drama and masculine chest beating that follows.
So I think let's start there. For whatever reason, NASCAR has it's a very Southern culture, very, like you said, masculine is absolutely right. Is it fair to say that Freud would have something to say about the relationship between men and their cars?
Well, I don't know. The shape of the car is not exactly the same as the shape of something else. On the other hand, the idea of a powerful engine, the idea of translating into this general notion of power itself, right? The idea of power as in the Nietzschean sense, the will to power, the will to dominate, right? To go out there and dominate other people, right? I mean, and it's interesting how for Friedrich Nietzsche's sister, and I put it that way because Nietzsche's last work, which was posthumously published by his sister, was heavily edited by her. So this is really not him, it's more her. But in Nietzsche's sister's understanding, the greatest freedom is the ability to enslave others. And she would tell you that unironically. The ability to dominate others. And it's the greatest expression of manliness, to go out and conquer the herd. And there is a sense in which having the biggest engine, the biggest bullets, the fastest airplane, the ability to go out and dominate, is a part of racing culture in general. And I think what's so odd about this film, though, is that it kind of critiques that, however unintentionally, I think, because I get the impression that Don Simpson, Jerry Bruckheimer, and Tony Scott just wanted to make a Top Gun film in fact, this is what they said about it. They just wanted to make Top Gun on a racetrack and capitalize on Top Gun's success, because the Top Gun was essentially a sports film in the military, and they wanted to make a sports film where that could make men feel good about themselves. But however accidentally, I think the script really does lay some subtle critiques on that, especially in the relationship between Robert Duvall's character Harry and Tom Cruise's character Cole.
And I would also argue between the Doctor and Cole.
Well,
because she basically says if she had her way, they wouldn't be doing this at all anyway, because she is in this role where there's this big accident and she has to do evaluations. She has to clear them for racing again. And we can get into that accident later, but that is her critique is, she, I think she sees it for what it is. She sees it as a way of trying to seek for something and to prove something. And then ultimately it's kind of like, what do you have to prove?
Well, and control is an illusion.
Yes.
The idea of masculine, this masculine urge to dominate is entirely illusory and just systematic narcissism. It's entirely, it's empty. It's an empty pursuit. You won't find what you're looking for, Cole. There are some problematic aspects of Dr. Lewicky's character, not so much her character as how her character is written, in the sense that the entire storyline there is one big boundary violation, right?
Yes.
The
doctors do not treat their patients.
Well, doctors don't fall in love with
don't fall in love with it. I'm sorry, you're right. Yes, that's let me rephrase that. Yes. Yeah, doctors are not supposed to fall in love with the patients that they've treated professionally.
Well, and I appreciate she corresponds well to the character in Top Gun, the teacher, the instructor, played by Kelly McGillis, Charlie, who and to Tony Scott's credit and to Jerry Bruckheimer and Don Simpson's credit, they make the love interest, at least nominally, an intelligent woman, right, an educated woman and a very powerful character. On the other hand, somehow in both films, she's not powerful enough to resist the charms of this young upstart man, and she's not intelligent enough to, in spite of her brilliant education, to not violate the boundaries of not dating students or patients.
Yes, she plays a part in the plot. And yet, ultimately, it kind of feels like that is her role, is just as the love interest.
Yeah.
This utterly fails the Bechdel test.
Oh, yeah.
As well, which is two women who are named, who talk to each other about something other than men.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it doesn't even come close. I mean, and the other women in the story, and there are few, but they're there, are, wow. I mean, I think the only other woman in the story that really has a speaking role that's worthy of the name is a stripper. That Harry and Buck get for Cole.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, let's talk about the fact that was an assault that he committed on Dr. Lewicky.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Lewicky just kind of brushes us off with, oh, boys will be boys,
Yeah, well, and it's kind of like they've dealt with that before. That there is that generation that was like, you know what, we've dealt with this a million times. We're just gonna brush it off because it's not going to change.
Well, and everybody in the room is laughing. They're not stopping him from having. They're not stopping him from inappropriately touching her. And although Harry tries to say, no, this really is Dr. Lewicky, but he's got that smile on his face where he's kind of like, I'm kind of hoping that Cole isn't going to figure this out because it'll be entertaining.
And to his credit, he does go back and apologize later. He tries to explain, which is not great, but he does say, I am sorry. I think I was responsible for this because of this other situation.
On the other hand, it's an instrumental apology. It's not so much an apology because he thinks that what happened is wrong as, I don't want you to have a bad opinion of Cole because it scares him. In other words, he's looking out for his race car driver, which I suppose is laudable, but it strikes me as manipulative. It strikes me as he's manipulating Dr. Lewicky so that Dr. Lewicky doesn't treat Cole in such a way that it makes him afraid or makes him not want to get back in the car. So,
and I want to talk about that fear next. That plays a really interesting role that I hadn't realized until Robert Duvall's character really points it out.
Mhm.
You know, you're afraid. You're afraid to get back in the car. You don't, and I'm like, I it was interesting to me because I'm not sure that I would have seen that, but it is true. It's kind of, there's this bravado that then underneath is this
Terror.
fear. Yeah. And I think it ties in with what he says, what Robert Duvall's character says to Dr. Lewicky about most drivers never want to be reminded of the possible negative outcomes.
That's one of the positive aspects of the film, I feel, because there is a sense in which Cole really does come to face the reality of his fear. And I think you see that when he goes back to get Rowdy and take him to the hospital, because there's a sense in which, according to Robert Duvall's character, I don't know if this is true of race car drivers in general, but at least for the film it is. Race car drivers don't, they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't go to a fellow race car driver's funeral. I imagine that many race car drivers were probably at Dale Earnhardt's funeral, but they wouldn't, go and get their friend and drag them to the hospital, because all of that reminds them of the possibility of what could happen in this dangerous race car, right? And the way they deal with their fear is to pretend it doesn't exist, when in reality the way to deal with fear is to confront it and realize it. And I do think that there is a great moral maturity in Cole in the last race, when he realizes, and he says this to Dr. Lewicky, that, this is my job. And it's like, yes, I'm afraid, but here I am. It's my job. It's what I do. And I hear in that a kind of, yeah, I'm afraid. It's okay. I can be afraid and do my job. So I think that's a sense of growth in Cole.
Yeah. He does grow a lot as a character, because he does start as very much this hot rod who comes in, who thinks he can do it himself, thinks he knows it all. And, he really, what I think Robert Duvall really respects about him is that eventually he gets to this point where he's like, I don't know anything about this sport, or doing NASCAR, I should say.
Well, he doesn't.
And I need help. Help me.
He doesn't know about cars. And this is a great segue into the relationship between Robert Duvall's character, who I would argue is the God character, which brings in process theology, because he's a learning God. He's a growing God, right? He's not a static God. But I think Harry Hogue is the God character. And his relationship with Cole is, I think, the most theologically pregnant aspect of the film. But to start with the car, because what Cole's baptismal moment, his repentant moment, his moment where he goes from, as you say, being this hot rod upstart to being maybe I have much to learn, is when he when he finally admits to Harry, I don't know what you're talking about, when Harry's trying to talk cars with him. He's like, what do you mean you don't know what I'm talking about? I don't
have the lingo of the vocabulary.
I don't know about cars. I don't know anything about cars. They just told me to get in the car and drive, and I could do it. I don't know anything about cars. And then the way Harry responds to that is, I think, very godlike, in the sense of, well, that's all right, not a problem. We'll figure it out.
We'll create a language together.
Yeah. And of course that relationship, that's a very process theology driven moment right there, of not only does the human being repent, but and a very incarnational moment potentially as well, but the God character has to get into the human being's world and learn how to talk to the human being.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting when there is the crash, and Tom Cruise's character has been left blind, and he's trying to listen for the voice that he hears on the radio. It's like I just hear them. They're not there with me, but I hear them.
Yeah, what a deep statement.
Yeah.
He says a lot more than he thinks he says. Like, when I'm in the car, I hear someone talking to me. I can't see him, but I can hear him.
Yeah, isn't that our relationship with God in so many ways? Or we're trying to look for God around us, but
another critical aspect, I feel, of the relationship between God and humankind, allegorized in the relationship between God or between Harry and Cole is the relationship between God, humankind, and creation. And did you catch that one of the most beautiful scenes in any film was when they're building the car?
Yes.
And when
And
Harry
the love
says,
that he puts into it, and
he's talking to it and he says, "You'll be perfect." And
yeah.
it's just like this, he saw it and it was good. Right, he delighted in the creation of this car, and as God delights in the creation of reality.
Mm-hmm.
But that gets into their relationship with Cole, because I mean, first off, in the Genesis story, I understand giving dominion over over creation to humanity as, you know, putting them in the driver's seat of the race car, so to speak, of making them the caretaker over creation, right? But in that sense, it's not just about you, oh human being. When Cole says, "There's nothing I can't do with a race car," there's a lot you can't do with a race car. There's a lot you can't do with creation. You have to understand, love, and respect creation. You have to know what a race car can do. You have to understand what it is you're driving. You have to understand what it is you're caring for in creation. And I find a great irony that there's a lot of creation care theology in this film, a film that's about gas guzzling race cars. So,
Well, and I think about that in the conversation about the tires, and I think about, you talked about knowing what it can do. I think it's almost just as important, and this is the theme, is what it can't do.
Amen.
Knowing one's limits. And that's part of what the Doctor brings as well. And that's part of what Robert Duvall's character teaches as well, is, we have these limits. We have to face the reality that we are finite, limited human beings. We have things that break on us. We face brain bleeds. We face our mortality.
Yeah, what do you think of Rowdy's character?
I thought it was so. I guess it's interesting to watch how the two of them go from being kind of like these bitter enemies to good friends. And I guess it's kind of the standard trope of, like, the established person who's really well respected, he's on the top of his game, and now in comes this new hot rod that's a threat to him, and so that kind of sets up this adversarial relationship, and then along the way something happens to the character, and then they become good friends, to the point where Cole is the one who does go to him and says, you need to get this taken care of, or you will do damage to yourself. And what was really interesting to me was the I don't know how biologically accurate this is, but it was just kind of one of those moments of really fascination where, Cole has a time where he is temporarily blind because there's swelling, presumably in the back part of his brain. But then he recovers and he seems to be okay. Whereas the Rowdy at first seems okay, and then later on we find out he has this brain bleed and needs to have surgery to repair it.
If I were to find a parallel in the Christian story between Rowdy Burns, and I would say he's the human being who isn't a member of the church. Good guy, but he's not, he doesn't believe, not a believer, and as a result of his not believing, and listener, my understanding of what it means to not believe is not the same thing as saying I don't believe in Jesus Christ, I believe in, say, Allah, or I believe in the Quran, right? I mean, to disbelieve God is not as simple as fundamentalist Christians make it to be. Cole is someone who definitely has an ego, but over time comes to put his ego in its place, to realize what a race car can and can't do, to realize that he is vulnerable, and to realize that there are limits to his ability to control this chaos. Rowdy, I think, is someone who just does not get that, who is absolutely of the opinion that his value in life is to control the chaos, and absent the ability to race, who is he? He has nothing if he can't get back into the race car.
Right.
Indeed, that's what causes Cole to come and rescue him, because if and by rescue him I mean drive his car, because if Cole doesn't drive for him, then he loses everything. Rowdy has put all of his investments into into his properties, and if he can't race, then he's up to his neck in debt. So, but that's my understanding of Rowdy. And I will say another thing about their friendship is that it's a competitive friendship, and that it turns from the moment they turn from friends to enemies is when they rent and destroy two cars together, trying to outrace each other.
Yeah.
And then they finally like they just completely destroy these cars, and yet they walk away from that race, that informal race in which nobody wins, as friends.
Yeah. And then they race each other in the wheelchairs at the hospital. It's just how they interact with each other. They're racers. That's what they do.
St. Paul uses running the race as a metaphor.
I thought about
life.
that. Yeah, I have run the race with faithfulness. I have completed I forget the exact wording, but yes, it's the thing that I really appreciated. I have to admit, I'm not a NASCAR person. I've never really gotten into that, partly because of some of these issues that I'm like, I don't see the need. What's the big deal about driving tons of metal around and seeing who beats each other, right? And most people watch just for the crashes.
Yeah.
But one thing I did appreciate about this movie is it helped me to have a level of respect for the mindset, the skill, it's not just running that metal around. It's knowing, here's how I'm going to get the best efficiency out of my tires. Here's how I need to watch this turn, because if I don't, I'm going to crash. And how many others have crashed at that turn on the track? That communication between the pit and the driver. And the psychology of the drivers too. And I've even said this in our normal driving, where our cars kind of become an extension of the personality of our drivers, and they have body language to them. And so that was the other part of this to me, and Cole talks about that too, of like, I'm not racing other cars, or I'm not racing other cars, I'm racing other drivers.
On the other hand, I think that there's I really like that you brought that line up, because I think that he's wrong in that line. He is racing other cars, and I think that's part of the whole point, is that he wants he wants to factor out the creation. He wants to factor out things like tires and engines and all of that, to where it's just his skill versus the other driver's skill. And I think at the end of the day, part of Harry's point is that you can't do that. There's nothing. Harry says that there's nothing stock about a stock car.
Yeah.
Right.
He sees the car almost as a character in itself.
Yes. And I think that the theological implications for that vis-a-vis creation are profound. The notion that creation itself has personality, that humanity may have a special role to play in the care of creation, but a role which I think we're
utterly failing.
Yeah, in part because, well, we drive around these gas guzzling cars, which is why I think the film needs to be understood as allegory. but yeah, no, but we need to understand that creation has personality, has spirit, has and is valued by God inherently. Like it is of intrinsic value. It's not just valuable because it's useful for creation. It's or for human beings. It's valuable because it's God created it and delights in it. God, I mean, and Harry created the car and delighted in the creation of the car. I got the impression that had Cole never set foot in the damn thing, he probably would have just delighted in looking at it. seeing the car, and it was good. It's a beautiful car.
Right? And that he would create just for the joy of creation. So there's a couple of times where Cole is driving through the exhaust and the fog and trying to make his way through. What do you make of that? Do you see some symbolism there?
Yes, I think that's about Cole's faith in Harry, and allegory to our faith in God, walking through what we cannot see, and walking by guidance. And this connects with Cole's line of I can't see him, but I can hear him talking to me. I see an extension of that is I can't see ahead of me, but I can hear God, Harry, talking to me and talking me through the smoke.
Thank you for listening to A Pastor and a Priest Walk into a Movie Theater. If you want to be part of the discussion with fellow theologically minded cinephiles, please come check out our new forums on our shiny new website, newfaithnewmedia.net. It still has that new website smell. If you like what we're doing, please help support this show and all of New Faith New Media's other endeavors by either becoming a patron at patreon.com/nfnm or making a one-time donation at buymeacoffee.com/nfnm. You can also check us out on social media at Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, and Twitter, though maybe not Twitter for too much longer, considering Elon Musk is a plutocratic jerk. We'll see how things shake down. Thanks for listening.
Right, I can't see it, but and the blindness, of course, is very allegorical. The fact that he goes blind is very, very allegorical to that. And the movie has a lot to say about faith in general, of walking by guidance from God, not by sight. And in addition to that, I think the idea of God's faith in us. That is not just, faith is a two-way street. It's not that we have faith in God alone. It's that God has faith in human beings. God creates human beings to carry out the task of caring for God's delightful creation. And God entrusts and has faith in that. Although I'm wondering.
I knew you could do it.
Yes, Harry says it. I knew it in my heart. Nobody does it like you did, but I knew it. I knew you could do it. I knew it in my heart. I believed it in my heart. He uses those terms. Harry has faith in Cole, and Cole has faith in Harry. It's a really beautiful relationship. So what about the Confederate flag?
Oh, other than to say I am glad that they finally got around to banning it at NASCAR. To me, it is impossible to look at the Confederate flag and see anything but racism tied into it. I know many will make an argument for, well, this is our history. This was the War of Northern Aggression. And I'm just like, you lost.
It's more than that.
You lost the war. And the war itself was about defending their right to enslave other human beings.
No, it was about their right to expand the institution of enslaving other human beings into the territories. It was about slave power. It wasn't just about maintaining slavery. It was about expanding slavery. Abraham Lincoln wasn't opposed to slavery per se. He didn't like slavery, but he was okay with it as long as it stayed in the South. But the South didn't want it to stay in the South. The South wanted it to move into the territories, and Abraham Lincoln's opposition to that was what led the South to secede. They wanted to expand the institution of slavery, but beyond, and we're going to do an episode on some movies in the Civil War, so we'll get into that. But the thing is this film, and I suppose one could say that if you're going to make a film about NASCAR in the early 90s, you probably couldn't get away with not showing the Confederate flag in at least one scene. Right. But on the other hand, it does speak to a particular view of the South that was a lot more respectable at the time the film was made. Although any historian worth their salt would have told you that it was bullshit. But there were a lot of respectable people, thought leaders, politicians, literary historians, folks like Shelby Foote, who believed in this thing called the Lost Cause myth, which was that the Confederates didn't really fight for slavery, or if they did, slavery wasn't really that bad. That the rebel flag is just about the heritage of being a rebel, and it's bullshit, and we can't just ignore it in the film. I feel we have to condemn it. I think you said there were I think I caught 2 Confederate flags, you caught 4, and I said, damn, that's twice
Yeah.
the
Well,
common name.
2 I think were like in their purest form. 2 I think were like a modified form, and then I actually think we got 1 kind of towards the end as well. You know, so that's 5 of them for what that's worth. But yeah, you're right that it's hard to not show them because that's part of it, but I think that part is something that needs to be talked about and to be addressed.
Yeah,
for sure.
And I would say, although I don't know if this is Tony Scott's, who's actually, I believe, English, not American, but I don't know if this is Tony Scott's intention, but there is definitely a point of contact between racing masculinist culture and the ideology of the South in the Civil War, the idea of domination and slavery. And it is to the film's credit, I think, that the film, again, I don't know if this is intentional or not, but it really does reject that ideology. The film, and it's important to note that the Confederate flag is present when it shouldn't be, but it's not very present. It's in a few scenes, and then they don't really, you don't really see much of it. And
it's not plastered all over through the whole movie.
Right, and it's the ideology for which the South fought is rejected in the film almost explicitly. In fact, the one who comes along and really grows the most, what do they say? Is he a Yankee? Oh, he's from California. When you're from California, you're not really anything, right? He's not a Southerner, right? He's not a Southerner. And he's the hero of the film is not a Southerner. And those who are Southerners in the film, with the exception of Harry, who's the God character, all right, this kind of blows this theory out. That kind of blows this theory out of the wall. But those who are Southerners in the film, like say Russ Wheeler or the guy who owns the car, what's his name, Randy Quaid's character, or Rowdy, well, they're kind of idiots at times. And their ideology really fails them, especially Rowdy. The ideology of this Nietzschean notion that the greatest freedom that we have is to go out and dominate really fails Rowdy. It almost gets him killed.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. Again, it's a woman who says stop.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think it's part of the character's character. But he says, you know, one of the characters basically said, if it were anyone but a woman doctor, they would have let me go right back on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, wouldn't have been as thorough or what have you. And I that kind of that made me, you know, some of the gender stuff here does make me squirm just a little bit in the midst of it. Back to you know, this connection between that racing culture and the South, I think, and I'm going to do a little reflection on kind of where we are in a cultural moment right now as well. I think that the reason that we see a rise in white supremacist culture right now, which I would tie in with that, which I would tie in with the fact that we saw the freaking Confederate flag walk through the United States Capitol for never in the Civil War did that happen. And it happened on January 6th, 2021. And so all of that is to say, what I think the reason, the reason that we see this increase is there is this need for belonging. There's this need for community. Mm-hmm. And this gives that.
It's also, I think, a need for a particular kind of story to guide a community. Like, what is the story of the Confederate community? Their vice president, Alexander Stephens, said of it. He said, our government is founded upon exactly the idea Its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery subordination to the superior race is his natural and moral condition. In other words, the story of the Confederacy, and if we let it, the story potentially of our country too, is that of going out and dominating other people. And there is actually an ideology which says very, very explicitly that and it is found in Nietzsche's philosophy in one of his books called On the Genealogy of Morals, that the idea of restricting human aggression, manly aggression, is life denying, whereas allowing manly aggression is life affirming, because all life is ultimately about the will to power, the will to dominate. And the greatest freedom, therefore, that human beings, that men have, is the freedom to go out and control other people. To deny them that is to the ultimate denial of freedom. And that there is a political ideology that has been built upon that foundation, that Nietzschean foundation. We call it fascism. Yeah, it's making a comeback. For some reason, it's not just that people want community and belonging, it's that they want community and belonging in a community that tells them that they're special, that they can go out and control and dominate. And as Harry might say to them, you have to know what the car can do. You can't, it's not about you. It's not about you controlling and dominating the car. And God help me, I just compared other people to cars, mea culpa. But it's about you being a servant to others.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which says something interesting about the idea of fulfillment, I think, in the film. Like what constitutes a fulfilling life.
Yeah, especially when you get into, that place where he may never be able to race again, then what is he? Mm-hmm. And what can he do? And I think that that's true for many of the athletes and competitors, and they get to the top of their field, and then what's left? What remains for them? And so then you have to realize you are more than your accomplishments. You are more than what you do. You are valuable, as you said, just for being who you are and for the relationships that you develop with mm-hmm. others. And so in that regard, albeit the fact that it's a very inappropriate relationship, the fact that Cole starts forming a connection and a relationship with someone else to whom he might potentially be responsible and care for and be responsible of himself towards, that's a sign of maturity.
Yes. And when she says to him, control is an illusion, I think she causes something to connect in his mind, that there is a way to run the race of life without needing to always win it. Without needing to always control and dominate it. There are ways to creatively run the race of life. And I think ultimately it's a fulfilling life is a life of faith, a life where of faith in the sense of having trusting intimate interpersonal relationships between himself and Claire, and between himself and the God character. That. And one of the things that I really love is I love this the utter joy when they race each other, right at the end of the film, with that smile on that goofy smile on both of their faces. Did you notice that?
Yes.
I think you can read that as a feature, not a bug. That there's this utter joy, not so much of having won the race, but of having, been there for each other and had this, glorious, faithful relationship to each other. And I don't know, there are times in which God says, hey, I'll race you. Or no. I also think there are times in which God says to me, boy, you're acting like such a candy ass there. I had to tell you something.
Yes.
The jabs, the Gibbs slaps that Harry gives Cole, the Holy Spirit is all over that. That's God. That's God right there, right? Constantly saying, "Boy, you're funny sometimes, human."
Oh yeah. Oh, I imagine God laughing at us all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Be like, what are you thinking? That's not what I meant.
Mm-hmm. There is something though about his relationship, in much the same way as we called out the Confederate flag. There's something in his relationship with Claire that we should call out, and that is the fact that when he was in the car and he got angry at the taxi driver in front of him, and he took off after him, and Claire was like, "Stop! Stop! Get out of the! Let me out! Let me out of the car!"
Yeah.
My mind went to something else there.
Yes, there's a consent issue. There's he was putting her at risk in a way that he had no right to.
It was an abusive moment. It was a moment of abuse, of real abuse, even if it wasn't allegorical to say rape.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. I mean, he was able to grow beyond it. That's fine. And I think that by the time they were still together at the end of the last race of the film, he was a different person. That's fine. But part of the danger of such depictions of growth is that a lot of times they instill in people a desire to stay in abusive relationships because maybe I can change it.
Mm-hmm.
Or her.
Or a false sense of security.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it won't happen again.
Mm-hmm.
Well, statistically, it will.
Yeah. So yeah, he's a toxic boyfriend.
Yeah, that's a good point. And again, as we've pointed out, the way that relationship was established is very problematic. It's not established under healthy circumstances.
No.
So I think they even call that the Florence Nightingale effect, where someone who's been significantly injured, who is cared for by someone, they begin to have feelings for their caregiver. So, and yeah, I'm sure they talk about that in nursing and medical school, and there's the reason that we set that boundary, that this is not a place to test healthy, you're not on an equal footing together. There's adrenaline, there's things going on that are potentially misleading.
Transference.
Yeah.
Although it's interesting that the power differential, I think, goes both ways with Dr. Lewicky and Cole. Or does it?
Well, power is complex, right? You have to do an analysis, and in some regards, he has power as a male over a female. She has power as a medical provider with expertise in that area. So there's the balance of it's not just a one or the other. It's a teeter-totter that is a balance back and forth.
Well, yeah, and my thinking about that and I'm going to say what I was going to say, and then because I'm not really sure if I'm right about it, but I'll say what I'm going to say, and we'll critique it later. Is there's a sense in which Cole, the power differential, favors Cole in ways as well, right? It's a well-established boundary that doctors really ought not, and it was then too, the doctors really ought not date their patients, and yet somehow she finds herself dating her patient. Why? What's up with that? What is it about Cole that really attracts her to him, right? And him being a professional athlete, maybe there's that.
He's a charmer. He has the ability to charm, which is a skill, not a character trait.
And yet, on the other hand, the reason why I questioned it is that throughout the course of their interactions, with the exception of the fact that she agrees to date him, which is a big boundary problem. It makes me wonder what's going on in her life that she would want to date him. But through most of their interactions, she's the dominant one, I think, quite clearly, in fact. she's the one who tells him off. Like, no, your control is an illusion. Yeah, I see that. I see her as the dominant one. Her is clearly the smarter one, and clearly the one who is capable of basically showing him what's what.
Mm-hmm.
So I question whether or not the power differential really does work both ways.
Yeah, like I said, it there's moments where it balances either way, and you're right to ask what might be going on for her, because that's always a lesson. Anytime you're ready to shift boundaries, you have to ask yourself why.
Yes, and
what's going on that you're thinking about changing this boundary.
A very pregnant question for pastors, especially.
Yes.
Well, I mean, she and I think this is why I would go there and maybe talk about it a little bit. She says, "I can't go to a race with you, Cole. I'm a doctor. I'm on call," and it honestly made it seem as if she was on call all the damn time. Like she maybe had her regular hours, but there was never a moment when she wasn't on call. She's a trauma surgeon, and maybe that hospital was understaffed.
Yeah.
It kind of made it seem as if she had nothing but her work, and so maybe she was looking for something else.
And that is a huge risk factor for you get into trouble when that is your whole identity. Mm-hmm. You get into trouble when you are tired and overworked, and you don't have the capacity to hold on to, because boundaries are ultimately about identity. Mm-hmm. It's about, this is who I am, this is who you are, this is how we're going to interact with each other in this relationship. That's why it gets complicated when you have someone who is both a friend and a therapist. Mm-hmm. That shouldn't happen. Those kinds of things.
Yes,
because it's like, what is the hat that I'm wearing right now? Not saying that it can't happen. It's just you have to be very, very clear. And so those things get a little more complicated when you start feeling that kind of wearing down. And you start, how is your identity being formed? Where are you finding fulfillment outside of just this? So
there's a theologically pregnant statement in the very beginning of the film on Harry Hugg's farm when he's talking to Randy Quaid's character, that I is very easy to miss, I feel. When he says, when Randy Quaid's character says, you can build a driver like you can build a car, and Harry says, look at that dog, the best darn hound I've ever had, and I'd ever taught him a darn thing. And there's something really theologically pregnant in that, in the sense of talents and gifts, things that we don't really learn per se, in a sense of working hard to develop a skill that we didn't have, but a talent that has been given to us. It's a part of our it's written into our spiritual DNA as given to us by God as just one of our talents, one of the things that we're called to do. And I saw that as a theme in the film as well, the notion of vocation and calling.
Yeah, I mean, definitely who you're called to be. I have just accepted the fact that I much as I love the idea of dancing or gymnastics, just wasn't going to happen. Those kinds of things. But I have found other areas that work, that is where I'm meant to be.
And I think Cole, well, he says it, and it's really interesting if you think of Harry as the God character. Imagine yourself having a prayerful conversation with God, and God is sort of saying, like, well, why do you think you can do this? I mean, why? Because you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know anything about cars. You don't know anything about creation. I don't know. They told me to get in the car and drive, and somehow I could do it. So it was like, I called you to it. All right. Well, let's figure out a way to talk then.
Yeah.
Surprisingly theologically pregnant film for the fact that it's basically an action film. So if you were writing a sermon on this film, what would you say to the congregation?
Probably use Paul's "I have run the race." I would talk about, what it takes to actually do that, and probably some level of talking about the spiritual disciplines, but also talking about that interplay of, there's who we're created to be, there's who we're called to be, there's the learning that we have to do along the way, and all of that comes together as we fulfill our vocation, as we run that race.
The key to running, I suppose I would say that the key to running the race is not to try to dominate and control it, but to not always have to win it, but to have to delight in running it.
Yes.
To know what it is that we're called to care for, to know what it can do, to know what it can't do, to respect it, to love it, to care for it, to not just see it as something that's instrumental to us, but to truly delight in the great car that is creation. And then of course our relationship with God and the faith that we have in God, to be guided through those smokes and crashes, and God's faith in us. I knew you could do it. I believed in my heart that you could be a pastor, Pastor Michelle.
Yeah. So what's next?
What is next?
The prophecy.
Oh, cool. So next is the prophecy. So next is the prophecy. Now, I've never seen this film, and this is your pick.
Yeah. So it's Christopher Walken, Viggo Mortensen. It's kind of a horror thriller type movie. It'll be fun.
I saw it had Eric Stoltz in it. I like Eric Stoltz. He was the drug dealer from Pulp Fiction.
Ah, okay.
He seemed to be playing a kind of Christ figure in the trailer.
Yes, I think if you're talking about who I think you are, yeah. So, dear listener, thank you for joining us today on A Pastor and a Priest Walk into a Movie Theater, where we talked about Days of Thunder. A Pastor and a Priest Walk into a Movie Theater is a production of New Faith, New Media, where we have various shows that discuss faith and meaning as they connect with various aspects, including Faith and What Resonates, where our resident musician, Gail Gallagher, who does music for us, has done various interviews with people as they share about meaning and faith in their music. And we also give thanks for editor Wesley and all that he does to make us sound really far smarter than I would consider myself to be anyway. I can't speak for Father Andrew. We thank you for those who are our patrons on Patreon and who support in any way. And we invite you to continue to do that. You don't have to just support us through finances. You can also share us. You can also support us by sharing, liking, subscribing on our Facebook, by participating in our discussion group there, and by leaving reviews for us in the various places that you have the option to do that. So we are so thankful that you have joined us today, and we look forward to seeing you again when a pastor and a priest walk into a movie theater.
And really quickly, a special thanks to Dave Hickey, who suggested this film and has been instrumental in guiding our theological reflections off screen. Dave couldn't be with us today. He wanted to, but he sends his regrets. And
we send our deep thanks to him.
That there's a race car driver.